How's it going, everyone? Daxellz, and today we're looking at 10 cancelled game series we still think about today. Do we still think about them because they're bad or they're good? Let's get straight into it. And away we go.
Many series go on and
Halo's not cancelled.
on and on. But what about ones that just kind of fall by the wayside? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on Game Ranks, 10 of the best game series that have been forgotten. Starting off with number 10 is Mercenaries, the last game of which was Mercenaries 2.
This was such a hard game to get hold of because the digital copies were so scuffed. Not digital copies. The disc copies were so scuffed and scratched whenever you bought one. They either just didn't work or they were just too hard to find. But yeah, that was before we had the internet, though. That was the days before the internet. My friend Wilzer Bob, you've seen him before somewhere if you've bought streams and stuff. He loved this game. This was one of the best games. He tried getting me to play co-op with him, but we just could not get the game. Fun fact.
August 31st, 2008. Now, Mercenaries Playground of Destruction is just a fantastic game. It
was
came
good.
to us from Pandemic Studios.
We get to play it.
It was a sandbox game. Came to the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, the original Xbox. It's kind of an insane story. It takes place in North Korea. But to boil down the mechanics, you're obviously a mercenary, and you have to, quote-unquote, verify targets. And now what that means is you either kill the target and take a picture, or you subdue the target and airlift them. Most of the time, you get way more for capturing them than you do for killing them. And then it also has something to do with cards that I'm not going to get into. If you remember the game, you know what I'm talking about, and you know that if I explain that, I'm going to be talking for a while. It's not particularly complex, but it sounds complex because it has to do with different suits and yada yada. You get the point. The sequel was a little rushed. It wasn't quite as good. It kind of just felt like plopping the mercenaries into another controversial country, Venezuela this time. Ooh. And they kind of tonally shifted it from
they made a sequel?
Oppressive looking game to a more colorful game. Because Venezuela is, as you know, a somewhat tropical country. This was a game that got delayed a lot, like multiple times a year.
Oh, wait, Mercenaries 2 was the bad one? Oh, I didn't know that.
And allegedly, EA Studios forced a basically unfinished release of the game. And keep in mind, this was on PlayStation 2, 3, and Xbox 360, which, did have internet access. Not so much the PS2, but the PS3 and the 360. But patches weren't really a normal part of console games at this point. They did actually put out a free patch, which kind of also functioned as its first DLC. Added 6 new characters, co-op, and actually cheats, because this was still back in the era where some games still had some kind of cheats. But it was a kind of a...
Not just because they had cheats. Before, they monopolized on cheats. So therefore, if you cheated back in the day, it didn't even... no one would care. But now they've got this monopoly of shark cards and different things online gaming. So then, therefore, they want to make monetary gain from your cheats in games. So you want to progress in the game, you got to progress in real life and earn that bank up.
Case of too little too late. It wasn't a good enough game by the standards of the first. It certainly wasn't as bad as a lot of critics called it, but it wasn't something that captured the magic of the first. There was a third one planned.
Oh, we love this game.
The performance
we
of the
tried playing so much.
Reputation wasn't very good. Sales weren't as good. And yeah, that kind of sucks. They changed up the mechanics a little bit, and it didn't work out. And as you know, Pandemic Studios was another example of EA just like brutalizing a great developer. And number 9 is Final Fight, which in some ways was kind of actually the inspiration for Streets of Rage. It came out a couple years earlier.
I've never heard of this.
It's Capcom. I mean, Capcom knows fighting, and this is a fantastic series of games. The last release was Final Fight Double Impact in 2010, which is just a compilation. The actual final game was Final Fight Streetwise, which was a game, like you could definitely call it that. I don't really know how Streetwise exists. It really should not have been called Final Fight.
I've never heard of it.
Even though it actually continues the story of Final Fight 3, it really just does not live up to what Final Fight was, though. Final Fight was a fantastic series. Just really nailed the 2D beat-em-up. Kind of defined it in a lot of ways. I remember playing all the originals for the Super Nintendo back in the day. And like the thing that sucks is
old school
Streets
games,
of
I get
Rage
it.
had a 4th entry that came out recently, and it's great. Like, it's a really good game, but it also makes you go, I wish they'd do this for Final Fight. I don't know. Capcom's been listening to fans a little bit more in recent years, so maybe sometime we will see a new traditional style Final Fight game in the vein of Streets of Rage 4, right? It could happen. I hope it happens. And number 8 is the True Crime game series, which includes Sleeping Dogs, even if not officially.
Ooh.
So True Crime was a pretty different open world game. It's kind of like the counterpart to Grand Theft Auto in that in a True Crime game, you played as law enforcement. There were 2 games, True Crime Streets of LA in 2003 and True Crime New York City 2 years later. Now, the mechanics are very similar to Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City.
I've seen Look how he kicked the gun up. That's sick.
At all. So it got a little bit of flack for that being called a clone. However, like the premise of it is the opposite, and the worlds that they're built in are actually very good. They did a great job making an LA and a New York City that work really well in that console area. Very detailed, very cool looking. And True Crime New York City actually didn't get reviewed that well, nor did it sell very well. Still, it was a good game. I actually liked True Crime New York City a lot. I liked Streets of LA a little bit more, but later down the line, Activision hired United Front Games to develop True Crime Hong Kong. Activision canceled it in 2011. Square Enix decided, hey, that sounds like a good game. So they picked up the rights, removed all the connections to the
and called it Sleeping Dogs?
It as Sleeping Dogs in 2012.
That's cool,
Honestly,
but not
Sleeping
bad.
Dogs is probably
but cool.
the best of the
It's a good
3.
game.
It's really a good game. A very different game.
I'm going to rebuy this.
Because it
I played a
certainly
little
does
bit.
resemble Grand Theft Auto in a lot of ways. And it retains the fact that you're on the other side, the police side. But combat is much more like hand-to-hand. There's a lot more martial arts. There's some parkour. Yes, there is some shooting, but not nearly as much as in the previous games. And honestly, at this point in time, I would love to see, I don't care how, but a sequel to True Crime or Sleeping Dogs. And number 7 is Legacy of Kane. Now, this goes way back to PlayStation 1.
Legacy of Kane?
The first game was called Blood Omen Legacy of Kane, and I just remember it being a very different game. It was a top-down action-adventure
I never
game,
played this.
And it was good, but I was really brought in more by Legacy of Kane's Soul Reaver in 1999. Now, the game isn't radically different from
I
the
was not
2D
old enough.
version, but it's 3D, and it really becomes much more interesting in 3D. It's a game that really benefits from the shifting perspective because it lets you go between both the spectral realm and the material realm, which is 2 different versions of it. It's kind of a good way to handle dying because you shift to the spectral realm before you can go back to the material realm. Kane, the protagonist of the first game, is actually the final boss of Soul Reaver. And it gets a little more complex in Soul Reaver 2 when you find out that Kane isn't actually the bad guy. He just didn't want to kill all the vampires by killing himself because he was the last vampire. It gets a little complex, but it's not in a bad way. Like, Soul Reaver 2 was fantastic, as was the first. But then Blood Omen 2 came out, and it wasn't quite as good as Soul Reaver and Soul Reaver 2. Soul Reaver 2 causes history to rearrange itself, and Blood Omen 2 follows Kane in an alternate timeline that was caused by Soul Reaver 2, and you get the idea that it's starting to get a little bit needlessly complex, isn't it? Like, it's not a bad
like if you didn't know 1 and 2, you'd be really lost by now.
But it kind of abandoned some of the progress that was made in the Soul Reaver games with the type of gameplay that they were doing. And a lot of this is because the Soul Reaver team had nothing to do with this, and the development of Blood Omen 2 actually started with the development of Soul Reaver. So it's a little complex behind the scenes, too. Legacy of Kane Defiance was the last real Legacy of Kane game.
I've never even heard of this franchise.
Kane and Raziel, the protagonists from Soul Reaver, and it functionally is the sequel to Soul Reaver. It was definitely better than Blood Omen 2, but it wasn't quite as good as the other Soul Reaver games. Some of the effects were a little odd, too. It was kind of an attempt to unify the 2 series by both the teams, and it was almost there. I don't want to say that it was bad. It was actually pretty good, but it didn't do as well as any of the other games. Then they decided to make a Legacy of Kane free-to-play multiplayer game that was not good. They had an open beta in 2015 and 16, and never made it to not open beta. The less said about that game, the better. And number 6 is the Sly Cooper series, which was a platforming game that was 3D, and by the time the original
heard this too. What's another game Will likes?
People were kind of...
I have a feeling Will likes all the games that are just Not working in the world.
Another 3D platforming game. But then it turned out to be a platform stealth game and great. I remember being
Was this a PlayStation exclusive
at the time and then playing it and be like, holy crap, this is different in a good way. The original 3 games were really enjoyable games. They had a really unique visual style that actually, even though they were cel shaded and that was quite a trend at the time, had a unique look to them. The original was kind of a sleeper hit, didn't initially do that good, but then started selling more and eventually became a Sony greatest hits title. Slide 2 and 3 did a lot better. And then there was a pretty long wait before the next game came out. Sly Cooper Thieves in Time was not developed by Sucker Punch Studios, and Thieves in Time was actually the least critically well received of the games. Also, people generally were comparing it to a series from a long time ago, and sometimes the nostalgia glasses, I think, wreck people's ability to really look at something for what it is. And Thieves in Time is a great game.
Some games are hard to translate into next generation. It's very hard because nostalgia glasses, like you said, just ruin it.
People, I think, agree with that more now. It's kind of wild they haven't made another one because Thieves in Time was actually a really well-selling game, but they haven't. And number 5 is Prototype, which is just this, like, the story is
this I heard it's pretty good.
Action game where you have all these powers, and it's just like a ton of destruction and mayhem. It's almost like if somebody played Grand Theft Auto, went on a rampage, and was like, but what if you were also a shape-shifting monster?
What part of the game is this? Okay.
The first Prototype game is probably the better of the two, not necessarily because its destruction mechanics are the best of the two, but it's kind of just put together better. It's a more interesting story. It kind of works a little bit more. Prototype 2 is, like I said, as a destruction simulator, way better. Every aspect of it is ramped up.
That's what I remember.
The story is maybe not as interesting. Everybody's a little bit too nihilistic to get too invested in them, but that doesn't mean it's not a fantastic game. It didn't sell as well as Activision wanted it to, though. It actually sold decent, but they invested apparently way more in it than they got back, and they laid off a bunch of staff, and we haven't heard anything about
That's crazy.
since. And number 4 is Darkstalkers.
That's actually crazy.
A fighting game series that really we haven't seen a actual real entry in since Vampire Savior 2, Lord of the Vampire.
I have never heard of this.
Yes, that's a hilarious title. Now, this game is constantly put out in collections, and it got an HD remaster back in 2013. Like, there's a fair amount of people who simply know Darkstalkers as the game that Morrigan is from, because she's pretty much a meme at this point.
I don't know who that is.
Honestly, it's kind of shocking that they actually haven't made a new Darkstalkers. They claim it's because that HD remaster in 2013 didn't do great, but like, that's also almost a decade ago. I don't think those numbers would hold today. We'll see, though. They always say something along the lines of Darkstalkers isn't dead. I actually do think it's a pretty good example of a fighting game, so I hope that we do see another Darkstalkers eventually.
I feel like most of these fighting games aren't getting, like, continuations is because they're up against Mortal Kombat, they're up against Street Fighter. The main bulk of audience are going to go to them, right? They're not going to go and try their luck with these type of games. They'll probably try it, but they're not going to stick with it because they're not going to be a continuation for later on, because the bigger franchises are just going to overdo them. Even Tekken, but there's so much of like a competition between like those three themselves that these guys wouldn't stand out very much. They'd only the original people that played it would play it, and then the people that are diehard fans of the other three would try it, but they wouldn't stick around. So I think that's why they haven't. These series end up dying a lot. Is why.
And number 3 is Ultima. Like, all right, last game in this series was Ultima 9 in 1999.
What the hell?
It was a bad game. It was very buggy, and
I've never heard of it, bro.
That said, Ultima 7, which was not one of the originals, might we add, was considered the best in the series.
7?
Now, Ultima itself is a really, really complex
They made 7 of these games?
Way back in 1981. It's kind of a foundational RPG, like JRPGs and Western RPGs have all taken so much from
I didn't think they had anything other than Pac-Man back then. What? No, I'm joking. Sorry, old people.
But again,
You're not really
last
that old.
one was god-awful, and they haven't touched it since, which is kind of surprising because it seems like it'd be a really easy concept to sell, at least. The complexity of Ultima combined with the amazing crap we see in today's
10 cancelled games series we still think about today. I've literally only heard about like 4 of these.
game engines. My belief is it would really be a great game, and I hope that someday somebody does it. At number 2 is Jet Set Radio, which spawned a single sequel called Jet Set Radio Future. The original Jet Set Radio came out on the Dreamcast. The second came out on the original Xbox.
Oh, no, I haven't. But I've heard of it. But I've never,
So these games still hold up. They have a really unique visual style and a really unique gameplay mechanic. I kind of like the gameplay mechanics of the original over Future because Future made some changes in the controls that I don't love, but that doesn't make Jet Set Radio Future not a fantastic game. It is. It's absolutely a fantastic game. Both have these incredible soundtracks, this amazing world, and have a ridiculousness to them that make just like spray paint tagging graffiti stuff into
I've noticed this list has been like a gamer that has been a gamer for a long time. So you're looking at people that were maybe born in the 80s, played games through the 90s, and their type of games. I was expecting games like Guitar Hero, which hasn't had a single release for like 10 years now, or maybe even other games like what other games haven't been released? Maybe a Tony Hawk game or something like that from the early 2000s, because that's the era I was kind of brought up in. So I got a bunch of games. Or SSX Tricky, that hasn't had a re-release since SSX, which was like 2014. I was expecting like games like only 10 year span. My guy's going back to the 80s and stuff, man. That's crazy.
How some skate punk games take down this mega corporation is probably the most concise version of a description I can come up with for it. It is absurd and beyond fun. There has not been any mention of a new Jet Set Radio game since Jet Set Radio Future. They did port it to modern systems. You can get it on pretty much everything. Just the original Jet Set Radio, not Future, which sucks. I really wish we'd get the same treatment for Future. But at least indie developers know that there's a lot going on there. There's a game called Bomb Rush Cyberpunk coming out that is kind of a spiritual successor. And I'm really excited to play that. I'm hoping it does really well, and Sega goes,
Let's go
that's
and
right,
shizzle.
people like these games. And finally, at number 1, it's SimCity. SimCity is really a casualty of the video gaming industry.
But okay, so SimCity is different from Sims, but it's still the same genre. They just didn't bring out a city version. Herbs in the City was a massive flop, but that was one of my favorite of the genre. I'm not gonna lie.
Particularly, you all know what EA does to companies. They buy them and destroy them, and then blame them for the destruction, and then retain their IP, and then nothing else happens. That's the case of SimCity. Remember SimCity 2013? You can't even list the problems with SimCity 13. It was a 3D SimCity. Now, that wasn't the problem. The problem was all of the various awful things about it. Always on, weird cloud stuff.
Looks like you're showing me City Skyline right now.
Stuff that didn't work. And when I say stuff that didn't work, I'm probably doing a lot to underemphasize just how much didn't work. People had every reason to hate SimCity 2013. There's no argument there. But like between SimCity 2000, which is a near perfect game, the original SimCity, which is a very interesting game, the Super Nintendo version of SimCity, which Nintendo imprinted itself onto and made this really charming version of SimCity. There's stuff in
Wait, is SimCity not the same as Sims?
It's just among the best games of all time. It would be nice if we got another one that just decided,
this is just City Skyline.
Make a game that plays just like SimCity 2000, but that looks incredible. That's what I'd like.
Wow.
Maybe a few new gameplay things like new buildings, but not stuff that messes up the formula. That's one that I don't know if I'm ever going to see because it just seems like they don't even mention SimCity anymore. The last thing that came out called SimCity was called SimCity Build It, which was kind of like a crappy free-to-play for phones, and yeah, it was still actually better than SimCity 2013.
When did he make this list?
It wouldn't be hard to make something better than SimCity 2013. But like, all you have to do is
what the
make
hell was that?
real successor to SimCity 2000 that looks amazing.
What in the world?
That's all you got to do. That's all for today. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos.
When was this made? Because I think this was made before City Skylines. 21 hours ago. Huh? Wait, what? What? Dude. Yeah, this is definitely The Sims. But yeah, like, okay. Does he not know about City? Someone's got to tell him about City Skylines. He's probably gonna. If he misses this, he'll like City Skylines. There were some features in SimCity that were better than City Skylines, but they looked very similar in game, especially when we got to which bit? This bit. This looks very like City Skylines like, but maybe you can control more features and stuff. Health, environment, traffic, education, safety, land value, health. It's a lot like. It's very much like City Skylines. So someone tell this guy that City Skylines is a thing. There we go. I never played SimCity games, but City Skylines is from that. I can tell is a definite proper predecessor of the game genre. Definitely worth a look at if you haven't heard of it. See, I'm not the only guy that thought that. I can really tell this guy is an old gamer. He is a lover of the old games, I can tell. But that was a very good video. Make sure to check out the original description down below. I'll see you in the next video. Laters.